transmitting live via satellite. You know the time when we rock the spot. Artifacts, new Jerus, catch wreck and get the pop. You know the time when we rock the shit. Team 1 and MCL, we be the ultimate.
Hey, welcome back to the Progressive Brothers Podcast. This is episode 15. I'm here with my co-host, Cmplxdsgn.
Mike V, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Good, brother. Yourself?
Good, man. Another productive week wrapped up, and looking forward for another productive week.
Dope. So what I wanted to talk about today, which is somewhat of a trending topic with the new administration, has been UBM, which is Universal Basic Mobility. And Universal Basic Mobility, just as a term, really came into the forefront probably the last administration, maybe the last 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. But it's always been a term that has been associated with urban development. And so Universal Basic Mobility is a system of partnerships or policies that provide a minimum level of mobility to all members of society. So this is kind of like a human right? To have the ability to be mobile, to move from one place to another without any sort of challenges, either by the environment or by your governmental system. Mm-hmm. Lack of infrastructure can be a reason for this as well. So it's all about creating policy around human mobility as a normal. And the reason why this is kind of important is because Black people tend to have the least amount of mobility in society. I remember watching an interview about Ice Cube, and he said he had never left his neighborhood until he was about 21, right? Really interesting, right? Somebody who you consider to be a very wealthy person now, at one point did not have the mobility to move around, did not have the freedom of navigation, and which seems to be a human right. And so the discussion kind of came about with the emergence of like e-scooters. Mm-hmm. And an e-scooter is basically an electric scooter, it's an electric vehicle as we know it today. We kind of take it for granted, but as a concept, it actually can get you from point A to point B in a quicker amount of time than walking. A lot of people don't realize this. And when we talk about EVs, most people just think of a Tesla. They think of like a Nissan Leaf, some kind of Toyota Prius or something like that. Right. But an electric vehicle can be 2 or 3 wheels. And 2 wheels being the common factor for a bike. An electric scooter, an electric bicycle, these sort of things actually can aid in mobility for a lot of people. And I just wanted to get your insight on this, Complex. What's your idea of like universal basic mobility?
I mean, well, let's look at it as an extension of what it is that we already have, right? Bus systems, right? We have various types of short distance shuttle services, and these are things to accommodate transportation for people who need it, right? However, you do have a technological onset where now you have micromobility that comes into play, right? Where you have something smaller that I can actually bring to you, for example, and then it moves you from point A to point B, right? To a main transportation hub, say like a train, a bus depot, maybe even an airport, who knows, right? Depending on where your locale is. But you're looking at a smaller way of moving person from point A to point B. Okay, so it kind of, let's just say, it lessens the burden on the larger forms of transportation, right? That infrastructure, whether it be bus, shuttle, individual cab or car, something along those lines. I mean, we saw the effects that Uber and Lyft and all these other rideshare services has had on the ability to make it easy to basically go from one place to another. Prior to Uber and Lyft and all these other these companies, you didn't have the it was a taxi. Perhaps there was a longer taxi cab wait, maybe an hour or so, depending on where you were located. And then there's where you had to go, and then there's the cost involved. Okay, but then a simple app comes into effect, right? And basically disrupts that industry or that sector of transportation. Enter micromobility, right? Bird comes into effect, Lime, all these other companies, disrupts even the rideshare portion of the industry, right? Now, here's what we're looking at. Well, since we already have universal mobility currently in the form of, say, buses, right? Your city bus system. In Los Angeles, it's the Metro. What's it in Boston, Mike?
It'll be the same thing, MBTA.
The MTA. Is it literally the same entity?
No, it's considered to be the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority.
Massachusetts, okay. So where they call it Metro Transit Authority here in Los Angeles. However, what about that same sort of infrastructure for micromobility? Enter a UBM.
Right. And so, to your point about Bird and some of these other startups, there's something called MaaS, Mobility as a Service. Similar to Netflix, where you have, an app on your phone, you pull it up like you mentioned, and you order your next ride or your next access to another device or vehicle. And so this is where we are now, right? We're creating systems of equity through mobility from a technology standpoint. This is a part of like fourth industrialization, right? Yes. You're starting to see lanes pop up with the in some of these urban centers, LA, New York, Boston, name your major urban center, and you're starting to see bike lanes start to become more prevalent in some of these areas. And you're starting to see, more access points for picking up whatever select brand of bike, that's popped into some kind of docking station. It has a solar panel on there. It's constantly charging it. You can pick it up any time of the day, any time of the night, and you can ride it for a significant amount of time and distance. It creates, universal access that was not there 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That was not even the case. Nobody was thinking about riding a bike or electric scooter or anything like that 5 and 10 years ago. Today, that's really common. People expect to see things like this now. They expect to have access to these sort of systems of mobility. And so for me, I think when you start talking about Black people who least likely to own a vehicle and least likely to have access to extensive amounts of mobility, they say economically most Black people are either unbanked or underbanked, and they have less than $400 in their savings. You got to decide whether or not you're going to eat or you're going to drive this vehicle. If you start talking about creating systems of equity, then you start talking about EVs being readily available, no different than, a place like a park bench or something like that. Street furniture, right? Places you go sit down, a baseball park, a basketball court. These sort of ideas of mobility is thinking forward, right? And so how do you integrate that and create awareness around that sort of idea complex?
You do it much the same way you've done it with, say, things like Airbnb or Uber Eats, right? It becomes a normal part of what you do in terms of your living modality day to day, right? if you know that 4 days out of 7 days of the week you have to go and work at this place, and it's 3.5 miles away, for example. There's options that you have. I would say, though, that the most efficient one, probably one of the most enjoyable ones, ones that make your job more valuable to you because the cost of you getting to it is lessened, right? And this is what we're looking at. We're looking at efficiency, just as a fundamental concept, right? And how communities operate. Lessens the burden on, let's just say, greenhouse emissions from cars that do the same type of trips that a little electric scooter does, right? We can consider that. We can consider just the cost that it incurs on the user, right? Over the course of a month, savings could add up to, upwards in anywhere of $100 to $200 plus, right? Depending on locale, surge rates, for example. Micromobility isn't privy to surge rates, much like how Uber, Lyft, the larger rideshare services are, right? Micromobility rideshares, essentially the rates are locked. It is what it is. It's there. You're at the scooter, rent it. It kind of works like that. So there's a lot of advantages at the, let's just say, user end of the scale, right? Yeah. So if you're leveraging it on an industrial scale, ensuring that your IoT infrastructure is sufficient enough to accommodate the use demand and things of these sorts, well, I would say that you're addressing a number of current social issues. One, mobility, like you said. Okay, in some areas, bus routes don't run as frequent in other areas. They just simply don't. Okay. 2, greenhouse emissions. 3, cost of transportation. You know what I mean? There's a number of factors you're addressing this.
That's a good point. Because that brings us to the next article on the agenda, which is from the city of Boston. Mayor Janey has launched a program for free public transit pilot program. And the pilot program will be phased over the next 2 months. Some people will be randomly selected to get the MBTA pass. Blue Bike pass holders will be able to take as many trips as they like during the 2-month period. Trip must be completed within 45 minutes to avoid usage fees. Riders are responsible for any fees, and for bikes that go missing during the rental period, there is no obligation to continue paying for the pass once the 2 months are over. So the cities are now getting involved. The government is now getting involved, saying, hey, if you were impacted and you meet this certain income per household, you can have access to these e-bikes. And we're going to pay for it. So now you're talking about a system that's going to rapidly scale, because COVID put a lot of people out of work. And so if they don't have money to get, to buy a internal combustible vehicle, then the next best thing they're going to have is access to bus and train. And obviously buses don't go down side streets and stuff like that, so they only work on main streets. But what happens if you happen to need to go down the side street, need to go to a supermarket, need to go to a certain venue where a bus and a train is not available? That EV bike is that last mile.
Yes.
Complex, can you speak to what a last mile is?
Last mile is essentially anything from the point of where a person needs to go, no more than 5 miles out. Okay, so a small personal vehicle sufficiently charged can get you 5 miles to where you need to go. Okay, that last mile. Okay, that's where people incur the most cost in transportation, literally the last 5 miles. Okay.
Mhm.
So if you have devices that can address that in and of itself, there's so much of a burden that's lifted off of the transportation infrastructure. We're talking in terms of cars on the road. Okay. Once again, greenhouse emissions. Not only that, but again, if we're looking at different verticals here, depending upon the time where you need to go from point A to point B and where you are, if you needed to use a traditional rideshare service like an Uber or a Lyft, let's just say in a place like Santa Monica, at 5 p.m. on a Friday evening, okay, that's a high surge rate, regardless as to which service you're using. However, once again, that little mobility device, price is the same at that time. And you're going to go the same distance.
Mhm.
You see, so dependent upon what day we're doing it, the cost that you incur varies. Whereas your mobility costs on a micro level remain consistent. So you know, Mike, it's funny because, you know, we've been really discussing this micro mobility thing for quite some time, and I guess it sounds benign, right? Electric scooter, e-bike, right? Doesn't really sound like much, but when you do it, when you look at it from the macro, you really start to see the social impacts. When you have something like this, especially with this article here, where they're talking about now making it an integral part of the municipal infrastructure. Think about what it is that they're thinking for the long term of the community.
That cars would be removed off the road at some point, and you'll have nothing but bike paths for a whole entire street.
Well,
And so,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, and so that goes actually to the next article. All the links will be in the description beneath the video. British Columbia launches cargo e-bike micro hub project in Vancouver. The British Columbian government is launching a new e-bike micro hub pilot project in Vancouver in response to the growing demand for home delivery. Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Rob Fleming says it will also help to reduce traffic congestion and air pollution. So this is also an environmental issue, right?
Yep.
They're thinking about this long term. Too many big trucks, too many, highly populated areas consuming a lot of soot from diesel and things of that nature. They're saying that, these sort of alternative vehicles, these electric cargo bikes, actually help reduce emissions. And so this actually benefits everyone in the environment. These are these sort of progressive ideas that this channel is kind of built on, and also the fundamentals of where Black people are going to have to find their niche in these areas, because this is not going away. This is coming, and it's already here in most places.
It's already here, and let's kind of stack on what you just said there. So you take like a typical, like a 30-foot box truck, right? And calculate like the price in acquiring it, servicing it, fueling it, right? And then all the emissions that it gives out, and just your general cost of maintenance and everything else intrinsic to it. Now, we take that same vehicle, and let's just say we divide it into slices of 10. And I would say that with slices of 10 portions of the cost of that vehicle, and we're going to estimate, let's just say, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for a brand new, box truck that's going to do, cargo delivery and movement and logistics and all that. And what we do is we say, okay, we're going to go ahead and break that down and get 7 $10,000 electric cargo bikes. Now, for people who don't know, I would say look up what cargo bikes are. You have these cargo bikes that are so sophisticated that they essentially have a box on the back of them. Okay. But if you were to divide to divide a traditional cargo truck up into 7 portions, you could break it down into 7 cargo bikes that run what? Emissions free.
And provides jobs.
Provides more jobs. Does things more efficiently, more rapidly. Things get delivered quicker. I think there was an article Mikey had sent me some time back, and I think this was, oh God, I can't remember the country, but they launched cargo bikes, and they were saying that the guys that went from delivering with the trucks to using the cargo bikes, they made the same amount of money, but their work times, the amount of time they worked in a day was reduced by a third.
Yeah, it was Colombia.
That was Colombia. That's it.
Yep. It says the BC government, British Columbia government, is providing $200,000 in funding, while the city will provide full-time employee to manage the project, including coordination and outreach to business. The ministry grant will contribute funding for coordination, building rental and maintenance, data collection and analysis. This is where we are right now. What's the percentage of Black people that we can really think of that's really involved in micro transportation, universal basic mobility as a service, e-bikes, e-scooters, e-cargo vehicles? I can't think of any outside of the both of us that are actually having this conversation.
I was gonna raise my hand. Yeah. This is a very legitimate question because this is the future. And I would say, Mike, and you tell me if I'm wrong in my thoughts in this, that there's a lot of people in a lot of cities, major, mid, and rural, that mirror us, right? In terms of our look. And I would say that...
You have some feedback on your side.
I do? Right. Okay, how about now? Am I good?
No. Still a lot of feedback.
A lot of feedback? Really? How about now?
All right, it went away.
Okay. I would say, though, that there's a lot of opportunity for people like us to get into this because the cost of entry is low. Electric vehicles don't cost much. On the low end, an electric scooter can be had for a few $100s. Okay. On the high end, a very sophisticated cargo bike, yeah, about 7, 8, 9, 10 grand. Right? But when you look at the components, what's used to build these vehicles, to make them, the parts that would be required to maintenance them, the efficiency that comes along with them, you just see cost savings across the board. And you also see a reduced carbon footprint. So all of these items that were detailed in this article, I can tell you firsthand, working for the largest startup in the micromobility industry for 2 years, and then
Oh, I'm sorry. Complex, can you unmute yourself?
Wait, how did it mute? Oh my gosh. How did it do that?
I think there's something going on with the wire on your side.
Okay. All right. But no, just to kind of wrap up the point here. There's been a lot of work done preliminarily from the biggest names in this. And trust me, cities have taken notice. They saw the e-scooter waste issue, the legislative issues and all this. Now cities are more or less taking this now more seriously as a way to build this into their infrastructures.
Yeah, and you got to look at the supply chain aspect, the micro manufacturing aspect of it, because you don't need this massive facility to really build these sort of vehicles, right? You're talking about basement shops, garages,
storage units converted
storage
into
units
shops,
and so on and so forth.
Yep.
This can create manufacturing jobs in Black communities. supply chain logistics, moving cannabis in a locked container box on the back of a e-micro cargo bike.
Cargo bike.
Yep. Kids who need to go back and forth from school that live 10 blocks away, from the school, maybe a mile or so, less than a mile. They could use these e-scooters. Application development around it. You're talking Amazon Prime shipments, in same day.
Boom.
Uber Eats, whatever. Name your platform.
DoorDash,
Caviar.
Instacart. I mean, Postmates.
And
Postmates was built off of bike deliveries. That's where it started.
There you go. And then you're talking about owning the process. You're talking about this creates hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs. Who somebody has to manufacture the rubber. Somebody has to manufacture the frame on the bike. Somebody has to develop the application behind it. Somebody has to do the employee management aspect of it, especially if you're talking about building co-ops. Now you're talking about taking it to a different level. There's a lot that can come out of these sort of, this sort of discussion about universal basic mobility, mobility as a service. Name your acronym that's involved: e-scooter, e-bike, e-cargo.
It's all fundamentally like the same concept, right? Like the universal ability for anyone to be able to move from point A to point B
in a more efficient and emission-free way.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about a first aid bike, a cargo bike, with all the necessary EMT, second, third responder materials in the back, supplies in the back, and you go to your next destination, you pop it open, you give them a mask, you give them water, you're giving them band-aids and so on and so forth, cutting down on 911 calls going in, oversaturating the dispatch and things of that nature. There's a lot of good ideas that comes out of all of this, but you just have to be invested into the process of all this.
And Mike, that's the thing, man. That's one of those ideas, man, that's actually quite brilliant. That's actually pretty awesome, because here, what that does is it does kind of shift how things are done, right? So simply put, like you said, like a first or was it a third responder, EMT type of situation, first responder, but it wouldn't be like
first aid.
I'm sorry. For something that does not require an ambulance, right? But can get there quicker than an ambulance could get there. Think about it, right? I mean, it's those type of solutions, the things that just really minimize or really just reduce the strain on, more of the traditional infrastructure. And what it does is it actually makes the traditional infrastructure a little more relevant, because it reduces the strain. So what it does is it lessens its deficiencies, to be quite honest. Right? It allows ambulances to be more deficient in deployment when they're actually more needed.
Yeah. For you can place as many as 100 of these first aid responders. Somebody, potentially, cut their hand on the sidewalk or something like that. They fell down or something like that. That doesn't require an ambulance ride is $1,200 here to go to the emergency room. You imagine you're dispatching, one ambulance ride pays for a whole entire bike and the employee who's riding.
When you think about it like that, yeah. So, like the you ever see those instances where somebody like a cyclist might go down, right? Let's say a car might bump them. There's no brake, there's nothing like that, but there's some abrasions and stuff like that. Things of that sort. 1 mile away, there's somebody who's just dispatched. Boom.
Yeah, even something like a garbage fire or something like that. You got a fire extinguisher in the back of that e-cargo container. You whip that sucker out. You get up next to it.
Fire extinguisher, poop. Take it out.
You're there faster than the fire truck is, because they have to throw all their gear on. They have to figure out where their destination is. They have to load up that truck. and they have to cut down the streets and go through traffic. By the time they get there, it's already
out
of control.
taken care of. Yeah.
There you go. There's a lot of applications that goes behind this, and so that brings us to this, your area of expertise as to what's on your agenda in terms of universal basic mobility.
Well, much in line with all of the ideas we've just been discussing here. One of the things that we just got our rideshare application essentially adapted to is a universal hub type of apparatus that's IoT based. So essentially it looks like a sophisticated bike hub, right? But it can host a number of applications, whether what we've just been talking, e-bikes, cargo bikes, kick scooters, or e-scooters, electric skateboards even, mobility chairs, Mike, for people who have, issues, getting around, they have to use, wheelchairs and things of that sort. It can even accommodate those. We could even take it a step further, and we can start talking about automated robots and security bots and all of those things. Ultimately, this is the long-term scope of what universal mobility is ultimately looking like. Infrastructurally speaking, it'll be able to support a multitude of small mobility devices. Again, fill in what we just said here. All of the various types. Hell, I would even say be on the lookout for even like a small sort of like micro go-kart sized electric car that might even become something that, based on speed limit becomes road legal. You kind of have something already. They call it an LSV, low speed vehicle, that's electric, but for its size, it's a bit bulkier. So, look to smaller apparati that are going to operate off of things like universal hubs, and it's going to be multimodal. So it'll be scooters, bikes, cargo bikes, maybe small electric cars, wheelchairs, skateboards, robots, you name it, automated snow blowing machines. What are we dealing with here?
So what phase are you in this in the development? In terms of, are you in the alpha phase or in the beta phase?
We're basically in production phase at this point. Everything's all tested. Really, what's been going on here are supply chain issues, right? So, with regards to some of our fleet aspirations, so we've been doing a lot of retooling. Just today, I had to take a trip out to go pick up some older Xiaomi scooters that I'm going to completely tear down and rebuild back up to repurpose for fleet use. So I would say at this time, it has more to do with just acquiring and securing devices. Now, on the other side of the equation, much to what we were talking about, Mike, in terms of the universal applications of this, what's going to have to accommodate this is an IoT infrastructure. Okay, and what we've done is we've partnered with a company here where our software is now compatible with their IoT infrastructure device, which is essentially a hub that can essentially accommodate any type of mobility device. This is where we've got to go with this.
Okay. Now, how do you, I guess my question would be, how do you see this engaging into civilian sort of application? Like, is this more commercial based? Is it civilian based? Where does it fall in terms of
that's
the
a good
end
question.
user?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. Okay, here you go. That's a good question, man. And I would have to say that this is where the enterprising entrepreneur comes into play, right? Because Mike, I got to tell you, just a few minutes ago, you there were some ideas you threw out there that I hadn't even considered, to be quite honest with you. So, it really just becomes a matter of what it is that somebody looks at in terms of what can be done with this. That's really where we're at the precipice of this, right? It's really hard to say. I mean, I can already tell you, based on the technology that we have available at the moment, if the investment was there, we could get the proper equipment, we could roll out automated robots off of some of the hub technology that we utilize. So we're here with that now. It just becomes a matter of who's putting together the proper business model, who has the right vision to implement these things infrastructurally in such a way where it's going to become a mainstay, right? We're so new to this. I think that's where, honestly, Mike, that question needs to be asked in a greater context, right? Where I think a greater context and a greater brainstorming session needs to be built off of that question. To be honest,
yeah, definitely, because a lot of people may hear the term IoT, they don't even know what it is. IoT is Internet of Things. So it's a component of fourth industrialization, where you have many devices connected to a broader network, wired and wireless, at scale. And so that's kind of where IoT is, in a nutshell, from a basically generic, explanation. And so e-bikes, universal basic mobility, they don't really function without an IoT infrastructure, which is what Cmplx is saying. And I think
you gotta have it.
Yeah, that's kind of the somewhat of the back end of how these things interoperate with each other. And so for me, and I think you might be able to agree with this, I think this is a new emerging market that has a lot of potential for scalability in terms of what kind of applications do you want it to be done. Do you want just the e-bike sector, the universal basic mobility sector? You say robotics, but we're talking at this level drones, right? Drones that can pick up packages and deliver and things of that nature. Pharmacies that can utilize drones to deliver a prescription from the pharmacy directly to the end user, to the patient who has COVID or something like that. They're bedridden. They get a text message. It says, hey, this drone delivery is outside of your door in the next 30 seconds. You come downstairs, you pick it up.
Yeah, it's like a
QR
service you
code.
opt into, right? Yeah, it's like a service you opt into. Would you like, automated delivery? You opt into it, then it's just like you schedule the time in this little bot, drone bot, whatever. Boom.
Yeah.
Yep.
Especially for something that's as private, like, patient healthcare information on a prescription bottle, right? That should only be seen between the doctor, the pharmacy, and the patient himself. So you may not want a e-cargo bike, person delivering it to you unless it's in some kind of secure package. But that's besides the point. The point of the matter here is that, like you mentioned, IoT infrastructure is incredibly important and a byproduct of how all of this is really going to work.
Yep. It's the backbone of it. It's how all this stuff works. Literally, the universality of it is based on IoT. Literally. Like that hub and adapter technology, what makes it work is IoT. That's why the device doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess to kind of wrap this up, you're saying you're in the production phase. you're very invested into the universal basic mobility aspect. Is there a website that anybody can go look at? The product, the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be pacificrides.io. We are a tech company. Primarily, we are app-based and we are IoT-based. We do provide mobility devices. Like I said, there's some supply chain stuff going on, so we're actually remodeling and retooling things right now to deal primarily with like US-based supplies for the time being, until we can kind of get some things sorted out. And I think that, Mike, that's where the piece that you brought up about like the micro factories, having the micro shops and stuff like that to be able to spin up 3D printed components and things of that sort. This is where I'm thinking this is going to start to be key, right? Because we are looking at supply chain issues, man, that really are causing a lot of problems right now. Okay. Outside of that, though, going into the future, I think Mike did a really good job, just kind of like laying the groundwork based on the articles that he laid out here of how municipalities are basically looking at this going into the future. Okay, they're no longer looking at this as a nuisance, or something that needs to go away, versus now they're actually planning to make it something integral. And so if you start now looking at ways of universality or multimodal usage of these IoT-based micro mobility devices, we've already outlined literally just the benefits of using something like an e-scooter, an e-bike, or a cargo bike, right? The next phase of the discussion are the other type of devices that can utilize the same type of IoT infrastructure, okay? Things that mow the lawns automated in parks. I know these might be sensitive topics, but we have to look at the impact of this type of technology and where it's ultimately going to go anyway. So we have a question to ask ourselves: are we the ones are we going to be the ones to deploy it? Now, I would say that Mike, over the last 3 years, we've done a multitude of conversations about this, really kind of leading up to this point. And, now I would say also that our hands are involved in it to where we have our involvement in this tech as well. So I would say that at this point, we have a vested interest because we see where this is going. And all of these articles point to this. The cities point to how they want to integrate this. Now, in this new paradigm, what are we going to do? We're going to get involved, or are we just going to be the user?
Yeah, I think the better description of it would be, do we want to be the cultivator of the technology? Do we just want to be the consumer?
The consumer, right.
Right. So we have to own the process in order to be a part of the fourth industrial revolution. And I think a lot of people may not be looking at this from a 10,000 foot view in that capacity, because
it's hard to look at it at that when it's micro mobility.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, that's a good point. So what's the name of the website again?
Pacific Rides, like Pacific, like the ocean, rides, plural.io.
When should we expect when should a product be launched?
Okay, so the app here, we are getting all the final details sent in basically tonight. I got somebody doing an app test right now, but that's just like on the production side. So I would say within the next week or so, because now we're just dealing with the process of getting the upload to Apple Store and Google Play Store, and then making the stuff available for download, and then the buttons become available and they go out to everybody. But in terms of whether you want to launch a fleet on the B2B side of things, if you want to launch a fleet, if you're looking at these IoT-based hubs and the adapters, the IoT adapters, and that sort of technology and all that. I mean, that's another part of what it is that we do. So we're on the infrastructure side of things. We're on multiple sides of it. You know, we're even down to the consumer side where if you want a scooter, yeah, we got scooters. You know, but based on these articles that we were just discussing here, we're starting to really see the importance of being involved on the infrastructure standpoint. So I wanted to make sure that what it was that we did touched on all levels of infrastructure. So once again, the site is pacificrides.io. And yeah, once again, Mike, it's been a pleasure, bro. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, definitely. Please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you get all the updates from the Progressive Brothers podcast, and make sure you all follow the Black Brain Trust as well.
Peace.